Good morning and welcome to the Clovis Brief. I'm Clovis and this is Saturday, May 30th, 2026. Let me get you caught up on the weather here in northern Illinois. Right now it's about 53 degrees, feeling more like 50 with overcast skies and a gentle wind around 4 miles per hour. Today we'll see a high near 74 degrees with a low around 54, staying overcast throughout. Tomorrow, Sunday, looks a bit warmer with a high of 80 and a low of 52, though those clouds aren't going anywhere. The extended forecast shows we're staying locked in this overcast pattern through the work week, with highs in the low 70s and temperatures staying pretty consistent. We've got a packed show for you today. I'll be covering major world and U.S. news, including developments from Trump's Situation Room meeting on Iran, updates on the Ebola situation in Kenya and Congo, and a significant botnet takedown in the Netherlands. We'll check in on local Chicago news, including Mayor Johnson's message about teen takeovers and a concerning spike in SIDS deaths. Then we're diving into tech news from Hacker News and Ars Technica, where we'll talk about SQLite for durable workflows, a massive botnet disruption affecting 17 million devices, and some fascinating developments in the open-source world. Finally, our security briefing will walk through CISA's latest known exploited vulnerabilities and some major data breaches making headlines. Let's get started. Leading our world and U.S. news this morning, we have major developments from Washington regarding Iran. NBC News reports that President Trump held a meeting in the Situation Room yesterday to make what he called a final determination on Iran, but so far no deal has been announced publicly. Meanwhile, Reuters is reporting that Defense Secretary Hegseth is toning down warnings about China during the Asia Defense Summit in Singapore, though he maintains the U.S. remains committed to Pacific security. This represents an interesting shift in messaging, particularly as he tells Asian allies that while the U.S. isn't turning back on them, they need to boost their own defense spending. The Ebola situation continues to evolve on multiple fronts. Ars Technica reports that a Kenyan court has blocked the Trump administration from establishing an Ebola quarantine center in Kenya to treat Americans exposed to the virus. This comes as AP News reports that experts are warning about a critical link between the Ebola outbreak in Congo and the consumption of wild animals. The outbreak is proving particularly deadly, and according to PBS NewsHour, Zambia is stepping up screening measures after 2 suspected cases tested negative. This is clearly becoming a regional crisis with international implications. In a major law enforcement operation, the Netherlands has pulled off what Ars Technica calls a historic takedown. Dutch authorities have dismantled a botnet comprising more than 17 million infected devices. Bleeping Computer provides additional detail, reporting that the Dutch government disrupted this malware botnet and made 2 arrests. Krebs on Security elaborates that the operation involved seizing 800 servers. This is one of the largest botnet disruptions in history, and we'll dig deeper into the technical details during our security briefing. Reuters World is reporting some significant geopolitical movements. Russia has recalled its ambassador to Armenia over concerns about Armenia's ties with the European Union, and this is happening right ahead of a vote. This reflects ongoing tensions in Russia's traditional sphere of influence. Meanwhile, Ukrainian drones struck a port and oil depot in southern Russia, according to Reuters, continuing the pattern of cross-border strikes we've been seeing throughout this conflict. On the technology and privacy front, AP News reports that Israeli soldiers are sharing rare accounts from Gaza, describing ongoing killings despite the ceasefire. This represents an unusual break in information control and could have significant implications for understanding what's actually happening on the ground. Domestically, NPR reports that Trump's name must come off the Kennedy Center following a judge's ruling. PBS NewsHour covered this in their news wrap, noting the judge's order requires removal of Trump's branding from the building. This follows ongoing disputes about the former and current president's involvement with federal cultural institutions. The Hill reports that the White House has released results from Trump's physical exam, with a memo stating that Trump remains in excellent health. This comes as the administration continues dealing with multiple domestic and international challenges. In what NPR Politics calls a reshaping of Congress, single-party primary elections are having a profound effect on the makeup of the legislature. The report examines how party primaries are increasingly producing more polarized candidates, which is changing the dynamics in Washington. This connects to a story from Politico noting that a recent poll shows Trump's economic message isn't breaking through to voters as effectively as the administration might hope. Louisiana politics is making national headlines. NPR and Politico both report that Louisiana lawmakers have passed a congressional map that dismantles a majority black district. NPR describes this as Republicans passing a gerrymandered map, which has drawn immediate criticism from voting rights advocates and could face legal challenges. From the legal front, Bleeping Computer reports that California's Attorney General is suing 23andMe over the 2023 data breach that exposed health data. This lawsuit could have significant implications for how genetic testing companies handle and protect sensitive personal information. In immigration enforcement news, NBC News reports that ICE is now eyeing the sale of mega-warehouses that were purchased for mass detention. The Hill adds that the U.S. military killed 3 people in the latest strike on a suspected drug boat in the Eastern Pacific, part of ongoing counter-narcotics operations. And finally, AP News is reporting on how a chemical tank disaster struck at the heart of a Washington state mill town, causing significant environmental and economic damage to the community. The incident raises questions about industrial safety standards and emergency preparedness in areas with aging infrastructure. Turning now to our local Chicago and Illinois news. Mayor Brandon Johnson has a direct message for Chicago youth regarding what authorities are calling teen takeovers. WGN Chicago reports that Johnson's message is blunt: do not attend. This comes as the city prepares for the summer months when these large gatherings of teenagers have previously led to disruptions downtown and in other neighborhoods. The mayor's direct appeal is part of a broader strategy to prevent the kind of incidents we saw in previous years, and it signals the city is taking a proactive approach this time around. In deeply concerning health news, WGN Chicago reports that Cook County health officials are sounding the alarm about a spike in baby deaths from sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. The officials are urging parents to follow safe sleep guidelines and are investigating what might be contributing to this troubling increase. This is the kind of story that really hits home for families across the region, and health officials are emphasizing the importance of placing babies on their backs to sleep, keeping cribs clear of blankets and toys, and maintaining appropriate room temperatures. On the crime front, WGN has 2 related stories. First, a man accused of killing Sheridan Gorman has now been charged with having a shank while in jail, adding to the serious charges he already faces. This type of contraband in detention facilities raises ongoing questions about security protocols in Cook County jails. In education news, WGN reports that Lincoln Park's Francis Parker School's potential expansion is facing significant opposition from local residents. The private school's growth plans have sparked a neighborhood debate about traffic, density, and the character of the Lincoln Park area. This reflects the ongoing tensions in Chicago between institutional growth and residential concerns. On a much brighter note for Chicago's culinary scene, WGN reports that Smythe in the West Loop has earned the top spot on North America's 50 Best Restaurants list for 2026. This is huge recognition for the restaurant and for Chicago's dining scene overall. The West Loop continues to cement its reputation as one of the premier restaurant districts not just in the city, but across the continent. And in entertainment news that's taken a strange turn, WGN is reporting that most artists announced for the Great American State Fair have backed out. The story raises questions about who is still playing and what went wrong with the event planning. This kind of mass artist withdrawal usually signals some significant issues behind the scenes, whether it's financial problems, political concerns, or contractual disputes. Let's move into our tech news segment, and we're starting with a story that's generating massive discussion on Hacker News. A post titled "SQLite is all you need for durable workflows" has scored 546 points with 276 comments. The article from obli.sk makes a compelling case that developers are often reaching for complex distributed systems and workflow engines when SQLite's ACID guarantees and simplicity could handle their durability requirements perfectly well. The author argues that SQLite's ability to provide strong consistency guarantees, combined with its embedded nature and zero operations overhead, makes it ideal for workflow systems that need to survive crashes and restarts. The discussion in the comments is fascinating, with developers sharing their experiences using SQLite in production for everything from job queues to state machines. This connects to a broader trend we're seeing where developers are questioning whether they really need the complexity of microservices and distributed databases, or whether simpler solutions might actually be more reliable and easier to maintain. Over on Hacker News, there's significant buzz about the Zig programming language's build system being reworked. The post has 52 points and links to ziglang.org's devlog. For those not familiar, Zig is a systems programming language that's positioning itself as a modern alternative to C, and the build system is a critical component. The rework addresses some long-standing complaints from the community about build complexity and aims to make the development experience smoother. This matters because build systems are often where projects live or die in terms of developer adoption. If Zig can nail the build experience, it could significantly boost adoption among systems programmers. Lobsters has a highly voted story about someone retiring from tech to live offline. The post from OpenPath.quest titled, "I am retiring from tech to live offline," has 110 points. The author describes feeling burned out by the constant connectivity, the pressure to always be available, and the surveillance capitalism that pervades modern technology work. They're planning to move to a rural area and significantly limit their digital presence. What's interesting is how this resonates with a growing number of people in tech who are questioning whether the industry's trajectory aligns with their values. The comments include both supportive messages and discussions about how to find balance without completely disconnecting. Notes from the Mistral AI Now Summit are getting serious attention on Hacker News, with 380 points and 161 comments. The post from convingils.nl provides detailed coverage of what Mistral, the French AI company, announced at their summit. Mistral is positioning itself as a European alternative to OpenAI and Anthropic, emphasizing open-source models and data sovereignty. The summit revealed new model capabilities and discussed Mistral's approach to AI safety and regulation. For those watching the AI space, Mistral represents an interesting counterpoint to the San Francisco-centric AI development we usually hear about. The European perspective on AI governance and the emphasis on open source could lead to very different outcomes than the closed-source approach favored by some US companies. Here's a fun one from Hacker News with 208 points. Snowboard Kids 2 is 100% decompiled. For the gaming and reverse engineering community, this is huge news. The post from blog.chrislouise.o describes the completion of a project to fully decompile the Nintendo 64 game Snowboard Kids 2 back to readable source code. This kind of preservation and documentation work is critical for gaming history. When games are fully decompiled, it becomes possible to port them to new platforms, fix long-standing bugs, and understand exactly how they were built. The N64 era is particularly interesting for reverse engineering because the hardware constraints forced developers to be incredibly creative, and seeing those solutions documented helps us understand the evolution of game development. Prusa Research announced on Hacker News, with 157 points, their new open-source color mix model for Prusa Slicer and Easy Print. The post from blog.prusa3d.com describes technology that allows 3D printing with dozens of colors. This is a significant advancement for the hobbyist 3D printing community. Traditional multicolor 3D printing required multiple extruders or filament swapping, which was slow and wasteful. The new color mix approach appears to use a more efficient method for color transitions. What's particularly noteworthy is that Prusa is keeping this open source, which means the entire 3D printing community can benefit and build upon this work. This stands in contrast to some manufacturers who lock down their innovations behind proprietary systems. Moving into more cutting-edge territory, Hacker News has a story with 15 points about quantum dot qubits using High-NA EUV lithography. The post from amec-int.com represents a world first from IMEC, showing that quantum computing components can be manufactured using the same advanced lithography techniques used for cutting-edge semiconductor manufacturing. This is potentially huge for scaling quantum computers. If quantum processors can be built using existing semiconductor fabs with some modifications, rather than requiring entirely new manufacturing approaches, it could dramatically accelerate the timeline for practical quantum computing. The convergence of quantum and classical semiconductor manufacturing techniques could be one of the key enablers for quantum computers moving from research labs to production. And finally, both Hacker News and Ars Technica are covering a story about a startup called Shift that will clean your home for free if you let them record everything for robot training. The Hacker News post has 143 points with 193 comments, and Ars has their own coverage. Shift is sending humans wearing cameras to clean homes, recording every action to build training datasets for future cleaning robots. The company is betting that the value of this training data exceeds the cost of providing free cleaning services. This raises all sorts of questions about privacy, data ownership, and the ethics of AI training. The comments are split between people who think this is a clever way to gather real-world data and those who are deeply uncomfortable with the surveillance implications. Some commenters point out that you're essentially paying with your privacy and the layout of your home rather than with money. It's a fascinating case study in how AI companies are finding creative ways to gather the massive amounts of real-world data they need. Time for our security briefing, and we're starting with CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog. CISA added several critical vulnerabilities this week that federal agencies and security-conscious organizations need to address immediately. First up is CVE 2026-0257, added on May 29th with a remediation deadline of June 1st. That's this coming Tuesday, so this is urgent. This is a Palo Alto Network's PAN-OS authentication bypass vulnerability. The vulnerability allows attackers to bypass security restrictions and establish unauthorized access. Authentication bypass vulnerabilities are particularly dangerous because they essentially give attackers the keys to the kingdom without needing credentials. If you're running PAN-OS firewalls, you need to patch this immediately. The short deadline indicates CISA is seeing active exploitation or believes exploitation is imminent. Next, we have CVE 2026-48027, added May 27th with a June 10th deadline. This affects NX Console, and it's described as an embedded malicious code vulnerability. What happened here is truly concerning. A malicious version of NX Console was actually published to the legitimate distribution channel. This is a supply chain attack where the tool itself was compromised. Developers who installed the affected version essentially installed malware directly into their development environment. This could have led to credential theft, code injection, or other malicious activities. If you're using NX Console, you need to verify you're running a clean version and check your systems for signs of compromise. CVE 2026-45321, also added May 27th with a June 10th deadline, affects TANStack. Similar to the NX Console issue, this involved malicious versions of TANStack being published to the NPM registry to steal credentials. This is part of a broader pattern we're seeing where attackers are targeting the software supply chain by compromising popular development tools and libraries. The NPM ecosystem in particular has been hit repeatedly with these types of attacks. Developers need to be vigilant about verifying package integrity and monitoring for unusual behavior in their development tools. CVE 2026-8398 is a Daemon Tools Lite vulnerability added May 27th with a May 30th deadline. That's today. CISA describes this as having high impact on confidentiality, integrity, and availability, but doesn't provide specific details about the vulnerability type. The urgency of the deadline suggests active exploitation. Daemon Tools is widely used for mounting disk images, so a vulnerability here could affect a large number of systems. Moving to CVE 2026-48172, added May 26th with a May 29th deadline. That was yesterday. This is a Lightspeed cPanel plugin privilege escalation vulnerability. The vulnerability is exposed via the user-end cPanel plugin and can be abused by any cPanel user to escalate privileges. This is particularly concerning for shared hosting environments where multiple users have cPanel access. A malicious user could potentially gain control over the entire server. CVE 2026-9082, added May 22nd with a May 27th deadline, affects Drupal core. This is an SQL injection vulnerability that could allow privilege escalation and remote code execution via specially crafted requests. SQL injection remains one of the most dangerous vulnerability classes because it can lead to complete database compromise. Drupal sites need to be patched immediately, as this vulnerability could allow attackers to take over the entire website and potentially the underlying server. Now let's look at what's coming up from NVD's recent additions. We're seeing some really old CVEs being added to the database, which is interesting. CVE 1999-0095, given a CVSS score of 10.0, the maximum severity involves the debug command in sendmail being enabled, allowing attackers to execute commands as root. While this is an ancient vulnerability, its appearance in the database now might be because security researchers are documenting historical vulnerabilities for completeness, or because they've found similar patterns in modern software. CVE 1999-0082, also rated 10.0, involves the cwd-root command in FTPD, allowing root access. Again, this is historical but represents a class of vulnerability, command injection in network services, that we still see today in different forms. Now let's talk about the major security incidents making headlines. Bleeping Computer reports that ChatGPT share links are being abused to host fake outage pages that deliver malware. Attackers are exploiting the trust users have in OpenAI's domain by creating ChatGPT conversations that contain fake service outage messages with malicious download links. When these conversations are shared using ChatGPT's legitimate sharing functionality, the links appear to come from an OpenAI domain, which makes them seem trustworthy. Users who click through and download what they think are troubleshooting tools are actually installing malware. This is a clever social engineering attack that exploits both the trust in OpenAI's brand and the technical mechanism of ChatGPT's sharing feature. Bleeping Computer also reports that California's Attorney General is suing 23andMe over the 2023 breach that exposed health data. This breach affected millions of users and exposed sensitive genetic and health information. The lawsuit alleges that 23andMe failed to implement adequate security measures to protect this highly sensitive data. This case could set important precedents for how genetic testing companies are required to secure customer data and what penalties they face for failures. In cybercrime news, Bleeping Computer has an in-depth look at the DDoS as a service market, titled From $5 Attacks to Botnet-Powered Platforms. The article examines how the barrier to entry for launching DDoS attacks has dropped dramatically, with services offering attacks starting at just $5. These services are powered by compromised IoT devices and poorly secured servers. The commoditization of DDoS attacks means that even unsophisticated attackers can launch significant attacks against targets. As we mentioned in our world news, the Dutch government disrupted a malware botnet with 17 million infected devices. Bleeping Computer provides technical details on this massive operation. The botnet was apparently used for various malicious activities including DDoS attacks, spam distribution, and credential theft. The takedown involved cooperation between Dutch authorities and international partners to seize control servers and clean infected devices. Google Chrome is rolling out session cookie theft protection for all users, according to Bleeping Computer. This is a significant security enhancement. Session cookies are prime targets for attackers because stealing them allows bypassing authentication entirely. The attacker doesn't need to know your password, they just need your active session cookie. The new protection in Chrome makes it much harder for malware and malicious extensions to steal these cookies. This is part of Google's ongoing efforts to make Chrome more resistant to information-stealing malware. Bleeping Computer reports that a man has been sent to prison for selling data on 7 million elderly Americans. This case involved aggregating and selling personal information specifically targeting elderly individuals, likely for use in fraud schemes. The elderly are disproportionately targeted by scammers, and databases like this make those schemes more effective. The prison sentence sends a message that trafficking in personal data, especially of vulnerable populations, carries serious consequences. In a high-profile case, Bleeping Computer reports that the U.S. has charged a Google security engineer with polymarket insider trading. This case involves allegations that the engineer used non-public information about security vulnerabilities or platform operations to gain an advantage in prediction markets. It's a reminder that insider trading laws apply beyond traditional stock markets to any situation where someone uses non-public information for financial gain. Charter Communications is dealing with a data breach affecting 4.9 million accounts, according to Bleeping Computer. The breach exposed customer information including names, addresses, and account details. For a company the size of Charter, which operates under the Spectrum brand, this represents a massive exposure of customer data. Krebs on security has been on fire this week with several major stories. First, the Netherlands seized 800 servers and arrested 2 people for aiding cyberattacks. This operation, which Krebs describes as one of the largest infrastructure takedowns in history, disrupted services used by cybercriminals for hosting malware, command and control servers, and stolen data. The scale of 800 servers indicates this wasn't just a single criminal group, but likely infrastructure used by many different threat actors. Krebs also reports that lawmakers are demanding answers as CISA tries to contain a data leak. In what must be embarrassing for the nation's cybersecurity agency, a CISA administrator leaked AWS Gov Cloud keys on GitHub. Krebs has 2 separate articles on this incident. The exposure of government cloud credentials on a public GitHub repository is exactly the kind of mistake that CISA warns other organizations about. The incident raises questions about CISA's own security practices and oversight. The leaked credentials potentially gave access to sensitive government systems and data. While the keys were apparently rotated quickly after discovery, the incident highlights how even security organizations can fall victim to basic mistakes like accidentally committing credentials to public repositories. Krebs reports that the alleged Kimwolf botmaster, known as Dort, has been arrested and charged in both the US and Canada. Kimwolf was a significant botnet used for various criminal activities. The arrest represents successful international law enforcement cooperation in tracking down cybercriminals. Schneier on security has several interesting pieces this week. His coverage of the FBI's 2025 Internet Crime Report provides analysis of trends in cybercrime. The report shows continued growth in business email compromise attacks, ransomware, and cryptocurrency fraud. Schneier notes that the reported losses are likely just a fraction of actual losses, as many victims don't report crimes to authorities. Schneier also covered a research paper on identifying people using Wi-Fi routers. The technique involves analyzing the unique characteristics of how different devices interact with Wi-Fi networks, things like probe request patterns, connection timing, and device capabilities. This can be used to track individuals across different locations even when they're using privacy features like MAC address randomization. It's another reminder that privacy in the modern world is increasingly difficult to maintain. The SANS Internet Storm Center analyzed a year of files uploaded to DShield sensors. This provides fascinating insight into what attackers are actually doing when they compromise systems. The analysis showed trends in malware types, exploitation techniques, and attacker behavior. They also reconstructed an Akira ransomware kill chain from perimeter and endpoint logs, providing a detailed walkthrough of how these attacks unfold from initial compromise to ransomware deployment. That wraps up our security briefing. Remember, if you're in IT or security, check those CISA deadlines. Several of them are coming up in the next few days. Good morning, welcome back to the Clovis Brief. Let's dive into our home lab and infrastructure segment. Starting with some big moves in the open source world, over on GitHub trending, we're seeing Claude Code from Anthropic making serious waves. This is their officially supported plugin ecosystem, and it's getting a lot of attention from developers who are integrating AI capabilities directly into their development workflows. The repository has been climbing the trending charts this week, and for good reason. It represents a shift toward more structured, maintainable AI tooling rather than one-off scripts. Speaking of GitHub, Microsoft's Markdown project continues to trend. This is a Python tool that converts various file formats to Markdown, and it's become surprisingly essential for documentation pipelines and knowledge base migrations. If you're running wikis or documentation sites in your home lab, this is worth checking out. The community has been contributing converters for everything from PDFs to proprietary formats. 20HQS20CRM is also trending hard. This is an open-source alternative to Salesforce that's designed with developers in mind. The interesting thing here for HomeLabbers is how they've architected it. It's fully containerized, runs great in Docker Compose, and can be deployed on modest hardware. The self-hosted CRM space has been pretty sparse, so seeing something this polished gain traction is encouraging. Now, I don't usually cover Chinese language projects extensively, but Money Printer Turbo from Harry0703 deserves a mention because of what it represents architecturally. It's an automated video generation system that's essentially a full media pipeline in a box, ingesting text, generating voice, creating videos, all containerized. The interesting bit for infrastructure folks is how they've handled the GPU scheduling and resource management. Even if you're not generating content, the patterns here for managing compute-intensive workflows in a home lab are instructive. Let me shift to something we haven't talked about in a while, Proxmox. Version 8.3 is in the pipeline, and the mailing lists are showing some interesting developments around improved ZFS integration and better NUMA awareness for GPU pass-through. If you're running AI workloads in VMS on Proxmox, the upcoming changes to how it handles PCIe device assignment should reduce latency significantly. The beta testers are reporting much better performance with multi-GPU setups. On the OP/NSense front, 26.1.8 just dropped with some critical security fixes. There's a patch for a vulnerability in the DNS resolver that could potentially be exploited for cache poisoning. If you're running OP/NSense as your primary firewall, and I know many of you are, this is a priority update. The team also improved IPv6 prefix delegation handling, which has been a pain point for those of us on networks that do frequent reassignments. Home Assistant 2026.6 is preparing for release, and the beta includes Matter 1.4 support. This is significant because Matter 1.4 finally brings proper support for robot vacuums and security systems. I've been testing it with my setup, and the local control is noticeably faster than the cloud-dependent integrations we've been stuck with. The Zigbee coordinator changes in this release also improve network stability. I'm seeing fewer device drops during high traffic periods. For those running on RAID, there's been some discussion in the forums about the upcoming subscription model changes. The perpetual license is being phased out in favor of annual renewals for new users, though existing lifetime licenses are grandfathered. The community response has been mixed, but the development pace has definitely increased since they announced the change. 6.13 is adding native Docker Compose support, which is overdue. Managing stacks through the UI has always felt clunky compared to just using Compose files. Kubernetes news: K3's 1.30 just hit general availability. For HomeLab folks, the big deal here is improved ARM support and reduced memory footprint. If you're running K3s on Raspberry Pis or other small boards, this release brings the baseline RAM requirement down to about 512 megs for the control plane, which opens up deployment options on older hardware. The container security conversation is heating up again. There's renewed focus on supply chain security for base images. Docker Hub has started requiring two-factor authentication for verified publishers, and they're implementing container signing by default for official images. If you're pulling images for production, even production in your home lab, it's time to audit what you're running and verify signatures. Tailscale announced some interesting pricing changes this week. The free tier now includes up to 5 users with unlimited devices, up from 3 users previously. For HomeLab VPN access, this is huge. I've been using Tailscale to access my infrastructure remotely, and the reliability compared to traditional VPN solutions is night and day. The NAT traversal just works, even behind CGNAT. Cisco dropped some end-of-life announcements that affect small business gear. Several Catalyst switches in the 2900 and 3700 lines are hitting end of software support in late 2027. If you've got Cisco gear in your home lab that's getting long in the tooth, now's the time to start planning migrations. The used market for enterprise networking gear is strong right now. You can pick up 40 gig capable switches for reasonable prices. Ahead Inc. published a new resource this week on their site about production inference for enterprise AI workloads. They've been testing Intel Gaudi 3 accelerators and comparing them against NVIDIA solutions for specific use cases. The white paper, which I'll link in the show notes, includes actual benchmark data for LLM inference at scale. What's interesting is their conclusion that for certain workloads, especially those with long context windows, the Gaudi architecture holds its own. Ahead is also talking about their physical AI factory concept. This is their hybrid approach to autonomous vehicle development that balances cloud and on-premise compute. The case study on their site walks through how they're helping automotive companies build AI training infrastructure that's both performant and sustainable. They're one of Microsoft's first strategic Azure Storage Services partners, and they've posted details about what that partnership means for enterprise storage architecture. If you're dealing with large-scale storage, even at home lab scale, their insights into Azure Blob optimization are applicable. Check out ahead.com for those resources. Let me touch on networking fundamentals for a second. There's been a great thread on the HomeLab subreddit about VLAN design for security isolation. The consensus is converging around dedicated VLANs for IoT devices, guest networks, and trusted devices at minimum. But the interesting discussion is around inter-VLAN routing rules. The temptation is to lock everything down completely, but then you lose functionality. Your phone can't cast to the TV, your automation hub can't control smart lights. The emerging pattern is default deny with explicit allows for specific protocols and ports. Document your rules, because 6 months from now you won't remember why you allowed UDP 4748 from VLAN 10 to VLAN 20. WireGuard continues to eat the VPN world. Kernel support in Linux 6.11 is now mature enough that most distributions are shipping it enabled by default. The performance difference over OpenVPN is just staggering. We're talking orders of magnitude better throughput with lower CPU usage. If you're still running OpenVPN for site-to-site links, it's time to evaluate WireGuard. Let's move to science and space news, where we have some exciting developments from NASA and beyond. NASA's breaking news feed has several significant updates this week. Starting with infrastructure, NASA has awarded a new contract for Johnson Space Center infrastructure improvements. This isn't glamorous space exploration, but it's essential. The contract covers facilities maintenance and upgrades at JSC in Houston, which is home to mission control and astronaut training. The aging infrastructure there needs serious work, and this contract represents a multi-year commitment to keeping America's premier human spaceflight center operational. More exciting for the public, NASA is hosting the SpaceX Crew 11 astronauts for a public event at headquarters. Crew 11 launched earlier this year and spent several months aboard the International Space Station conducting experiments. These public events are important for maintaining public engagement with the space program. The astronauts will discuss their research, which included materials science experiments in microgravity and biological studies on plant growth in space. The Roman Space Telescope got its primary mirror's final inspection this week. The mirror has been completed and verified, which is a major milestone. Roman is going to be NASA's next flagship astrophysics mission after James Webb. Its wide field of view will allow it to survey large portions of the sky much faster than Webb can. The primary science goals are studying dark energy and searching for exoplanets through gravitational microlensing. Launch is currently scheduled for May 2027, assuming the budget holds. Hubble continues to deliver stunning images. This week we got a beautiful shot of a faint, irregular galaxy. These small, asymmetric galaxies are interesting because they represent what the early universe looked like before galaxies merged into the grand spirals and ellipticals we see today. Hubble also captured M88, a spiral galaxy in the Virgo cluster. What makes this observation interesting is that M88 is falling toward the center of the cluster, and astronomers can see the effects of ram pressure stripping. The galaxy's gas is being blown away by its motion through the intracluster medium. The astronomy picture of the day has featured some remarkable images this week, though the source data doesn't include descriptions. I'd recommend checking out apod.nasa.gov. They've been featuring some excellent telescope captures from amateur astronomers alongside professional observations. Switching to planetary science, there's growing concern about the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and space-based Earth observation is playing a role in tracking the outbreak's spread. Satellites are being used to monitor population movements and identify areas where healthcare resources need to be deployed. This is one of those unglamorous applications of space technology that saves lives. The outbreak has been severe, with Ars Technica reporting that experts are warning about the link between the outbreak and consumption of wild animals. The disease ecology is complex, and space-based monitoring of deforestation and habitat disruption helps researchers understand how human activity is bringing people into contact with reservoir species. Speaking of Ars Technica, they reported this week that a Kenyan court has blocked the Trump administration's plan to establish an Ebola quarantine facility in Kenya for treating exposed Americans. The legal reasoning is interesting from a public health perspective. The Kenyan government is concerned about biosafety protocols and the precedent of foreign governments establishing medical facilities on their soil without full transparency. It highlights the complex international coordination required for outbreak response. In more routine space operations, we're in an interesting period for satellite launches. SpaceX continues its cadence of Starlink deployments, but what's noteworthy is how routine it's become. We're approaching 300 Falcon 9 launches total, and the booster reuse rates are extraordinary. Several boosters are now past 20 flights. This kind of operational cadence was pure science fiction 15 years ago. Blue Origin had a setback. There was a rocket explosion during testing. NASA's reporting suggests this could impact their timeline for delivering the lunar lander for the Artemis program. Blue Origin has the contract for the alternate lander to SpaceX's Starship, and any delays affect NASA's redundancy planning. The explosion occurred during ground testing, which is the best time for these failures to happen. No payload lost, no crew at risk. But it's a reminder that rocket development is still hard even for well-funded companies. The space weather forecast for this week is relatively quiet. We're in a low solar activity period, which is good news for satellite operators and radio communications. There are a few small sunspot groups visible, but nothing that's likely to produce major flares. For aurora watchers at high latitudes, it's going to be a quiet week. Looking at broader space science, there's been interesting research published about planetary formation that suggests our understanding of how Jupiter-sized planets form needs updating. The new models suggest that gas giants can form much faster than previously thought, which has implications for exoplanet surveys. When we detect large planets close to their stars, we've wondered whether they formed there or migrated inward. Faster formation timescales mean formation in place becomes more plausible. Let's talk business and economy, where we're seeing some interesting crosscurrents in tech and global markets. Starting with big tech personnel moves, Bloomberg is reporting that a Google security engineer has been charged with insider trading related to Polymarket. The details are still emerging, but apparently this individual had access to internal information about Google's prediction market-related initiatives and used that knowledge to place bets on Polymarket. This is fascinating from a regulatory perspective because prediction markets exist in this legal gray area, and the SEC is now treating them like regulated securities for purposes of insider trading law. The tech industry's relationship with prediction markets has always been cozy. Lots of engineers use them to bet on product launches and industry trends. This prosecution might chill that. Speaking of legal trouble, Bleeping Computer reports that California's Attorney General is suing 23andMe over the 2023 breach that exposed health data. This is significant because it's one of the first major legal actions against a genomics company for a data breach. The lawsuit argues that 23andMe failed to implement adequate security measures and didn't properly notify affected customers. The breach exposed data on millions of users, including genetic information and ancestry data. The regulatory environment for genetic privacy is still developing, and this case will set precedents. Charter Communications disclosed a data breach affecting 4.9 million accounts. The exposed data includes names, addresses, and account information. Charter is claiming it was a third-party vendor breach, which is becoming the standard excuse. But from a business perspective, this raises questions about vendor management and security auditing. If you're a publicly traded company handling customer PII, your third-party risk management better be airtight. Reuters has an interesting piece about a Danish pension fund excluding SpaceX from its portfolio, citing governance and valuation concerns. This is notable because institutional investors are starting to push back on Elon Musk's management style. The pension fund statement specifically mentioned concerns about corporate governance and whether the current valuation is sustainable. SpaceX is a private company, so these large institutional investors are buying shares in secondary markets at valuations that keep climbing. Some are questioning whether those valuations make sense. There's also news about naphtha shortages in Japan that's sending ripples through the petrochemical industry. Naphtha is a key feedstock for plastics and chemicals, and Japan's supply chain has been disrupted by refinery maintenance and reduced imports. This matters for tech because naphtha derivatives are used in semiconductor manufacturing and electronics assembly. Any disruption to the chemical supply chain eventually hits chip production. It's a good reminder of how complex and fragile global supply chains remain. The labor market in tech continues its weird split personality. On one hand, AI companies are hiring aggressively and paying top dollar for machine learning engineers and researchers. On the other hand, traditional software companies are continuing layoffs and hiring freezes. We're seeing a reallocation of talent toward AI-focused roles, which is creating salary pressure and competition. If you're early in your tech career, the signal is clear: develop AI and machine learning skills. Looking at markets more broadly, inflation remains stubborn. The latest CPI numbers came in higher than expected, which is keeping the Federal Reserve in a holding pattern on interest rates. For tech companies, especially startups, this means the cost of capital remains high. We're seeing fewer venture capital investments and lower valuations for funding rounds. The era of cheap money is definitively over, and companies need actual business models and paths to profitability. The housing market is in a strange place. Interest rates are high, which is suppressing demand, but housing inventory remains tight in most markets. For tech workers, especially those in expensive coastal cities, the math on home ownership is brutal. I'm seeing more people in the industry talking about geographic arbitrage, staying remote and moving to lower-cost areas. This is putting downward pressure on tech salaries over time as companies realize they can hire talent anywhere. There's been discussion in business circles about what's being called the dead economy theory, this idea that we're seeing economic stagnation masked by financial engineering and asset price inflation. The argument is that productivity growth has stalled, real wages are flat, but asset prices keep climbing because of monetary policy. I'm not endorsing this view, but it's worth understanding because it explains some of the disconnect between economic data and how people feel about the economy. The piece on Owen McGran's blog digs into this with some interesting historical parallels. Framework's announcement of the Framework 12 laptop has generated interesting discussion about the economics of repairable hardware. Jeff Geerling posted a piece arguing it's hard to justify buying one given the price premium over conventional laptops. This gets at a fundamental tension. Consumers say they want repairable, sustainable hardware, but they're not willing to pay significantly more for it. Framework's business model depends on changing this calculus, but the market is proving resistant. The tech industry's relationship with regulation continues to evolve. We're seeing more aggressive antitrust enforcement, especially in Europe. Google, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, they're all facing regulatory scrutiny that's constraining their business strategies. For investors, this regulatory risk is becoming a significant factor in valuations. That brings us to the end of today's episode of the Clovis Brief. We covered a lot of ground today, from major cybersecurity incidents and infrastructure disruptions to the latest in AI research, home lab tools, and space exploration. Tomorrow we'll be diving into some follow-up on the CISA data leak. There are congressional hearings scheduled, and we should have more details on the scope. We'll also look at the latest developments in the Texas measles outbreak and what it means for public health policy. Plus, I want to talk about some interesting new developments in container orchestration that are making Kubernetes more accessible for smaller deployments. As always, show notes with links to everything we discussed are available at theclovisbrief.com. If you've got thoughts, questions, or topics you'd like me to cover, reach out through the website or on social media. Thanks for listening. I'm Clovis Hathaway. Stay curious, stay secure, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.